Tim, thank you so much for coming. What comes out, and so many things out of Tim's talk, I mean, how did we end up in this mess with UPV food? I mean, that statistic, he said that 70% of kids' food is coming from that source at the moment. I mean, we just, as a government, we have no power over this, do we?
Not much, other than to do as he was saying, which is to resist, to eat differently. How do we get into this mess? Well, that's a very long story. In Britain, it's had a different history to, say, Italy or to Africa. But around the world, the same process, the same trends are emerging. And essentially, that's that land use has been very concentrated in what it produces. Farming has been encouraged for the last 70, 80 years to produce commodities. Commodities in mass scale are then converted in factories. The factory is designed to basically substitute different foods according to whatever is cheapest in the market. And essentially, it's driven by the political economy. In my book, which is much more boring than the other Tims.
It's not.
It is boring. And I assure you it's boring. I wrote it. There's about one or two jokes, but not many.
Good.
But it really tries to answer your question, which is, how do we get into this mess? The answer is that commodification. In Britain, in 1846, a decision was made to stop supporting British food and to instead just go for wherever it was cheapest. Britain had an empire. It was an imperial food system within 50 years. Lots of very complicated things changed culture. And the aspiration was driven very, very understandably, I make that very clear, by if you were on an income where 70% of your food went on food, to lower that was a very good thing.
And how late into the last century was 70% of a household income being spent on food?
Well, in 1950, at least 50% of household income on average was being spent on food. This is post-Second World War. So we're talking, I'm 75 years old. I was born immediately, same as you, immediately after the Second World War. This is a process that was decided on, backed, improved at the global level.
Make food cheaper.
Make food cheaper. Invest in more intensive systems of production on the farm. Use factories to manufacture and get cheaper food out. And at one level, it has been incredibly successful. It's, other than wars, it's the most successful food policy Western capitalism has ever had. If you want to change a diet, Tim Spector is not listening anymore, you have a war. Because in wars, diets change on a systemic way. I spent 4 years of my life on the Eat Lancet Commission, trying to look at the ecosystems. Is it possible to feed 9-10 billion people by 2050 healthily in some broad sense without destroying the ecosystems on which we depend? And I wasn't sure what the answer would be, but the answer actually was, after 4 years' work, was yes, we could do it. But it would not be eating the diet of the Brits or the North Americans. It would be eating a much simpler diet. It would be a more diverse diet. Tim, I'm a social scientist, but I too have said years before t'other Tim, eat 30 plants. You've got to eat diversity, get that diversity into the field and down your throat to be able to bridge the gap between public health and environmental health.
Okay, but
So this is a complicated, we can't blame just nasty food companies. We can, actually, but we've been part of that.
Sure.
If we want to do something differently and have a better relationship to food, we've got to say, well, lives generally change. And how low do we allow cheapness to be? Now, I speak as a professor, well paid. It doesn't matter to me, the cost of food. I can afford it. It matters very much if you're on universal credit. I've spent most of the day today on a cost of living commission in South London, where I live, and it's harrowing. Yeah. There is devastation. There is destitution. People talking of destitution. People not eating. The tests that we do on food poverty in this country and in the United States are, have you not eaten maybe once in a month or something? We've got Mike Nelson in the room here, pioneer of food poverty research here. We've got now people not eating for 4 days in Britain in order to feed their kids. So to say I want food to be more expensive is slightly problematic, Rosie. It's a very tricky politics here.
I know, but I'd still come back to the fact that we started to get real ill health in food in the 70s, a bit 80s, but really into the 90s.
1974, the first COMA committee, the Committee on Medical Aspects of Food Policy, which was abolished, stupidly, in my view. The first report to really show that there was a serious problem, and then it was cardiovascular disease, for all sorts of reasons that Tim's first book actually addressed well. And Caroline Walker, your friend of mine, and Geoffrey Cannon exposed, 35 years ago. That politics has been brought in very well. But still, I would say in Britain, well, you know as well as I do, Rosie, we lack a food policy. We have not got politicians who are wanting to join the dots. And something's got to break, because the catastrophe that we've got of the food industry and us colluding with it is dumping the damage on the health service and on the environment. I mean, here, I promised you I'd do this. This is a deeply boring article, so I'm going to say
Tim has a brilliant email.
Not by me, for once. This is just out in Nature Sustainability. I'll just read you the first 2 lines. The global food system is fueled by extensive appropriation and degradation of the Earth's natural capital, using roughly 50% of habitable land, 70% of available fresh water, emitting 23 to 34% of global anthropogenic, that means made by us humans, greenhouse gases, polluting watersheds and coastal seas with nutrients and harvesting aquatic food from nearly every river, lake and ocean. This is, what we're eating is the biggest driver of global climate change, land use, pollution of the seas. It is staggeringly important, what the other Tim said, that what we eat is the bridge between public health at a population level, let alone individually, his point, but it's also the biggest land user, destroyer of ecosystems, destroyer of biodiversity. So when T'other Tim says, eat 30 plants, make those as diverse as you can, but make sure how they're grown. Okay. Where are they from? How are they? What's the embedded carbon? What's the embedded water in them? We don't know that. We've got Dan, the next person up. We haven't got, there's no label that gives you the ecosystem's damage of
the government are now talking about an ecosystems label, which you will be able to tell if the product you're eating has involved deforestation. That's as far as it goes. Food industry is fighting back.
But that's suitably far away. Forestry, it's the Amazon, not what's happening here in Britain. Britain is once again a parasitic nation. It depends how you calculate it. Boring people like me are interested in this, but it's 50% of what you're eating is sourced from elsewhere. Now go to the social science and say, what do the Brits want? They say they want more British food, they want to have trust in it, they want it to be good for the climate, they want it to be good for the countryside, they want jobs, etc. That's the complete reverse of what we're getting. And we've not got a grip. You and I, this is our mutual interest. If you didn't know, this is Rosie's interest as well as mine. This is the politics of it. Parliament is failing us. Committees, you chaired got together a wonderful committee in the House of Lords. It was a rarity that we have this general picture produced. And we, the people, are not pushing for it. We're not supporting our parliamentarians to demand something better. And it's going to be very complicated and hard politics. But the issue that people like me think is if we don't do it, it'll be made on us.
I wish that it was true that it will be made on us, but it seems like there's a sort of fight to the death. I mean, okay, just yesterday, in our climate change committee, we had Therese Coffey coming back from Montreal at the Climate Biodiversity Conference called the CBD, with pledges of all sorts. And I asked her what had been the representation of the food companies. Very little, apart from lobbying and putting up stands. What have you done about them? Oh, I'm having a meeting in about a month.
Yeah.
And you think it's completely well known that the stat that you just gave, the level of all biodiversity loss really comes from the food industry.
It's heavily driven by the food industry.
Well, so heavily.
Dan will tell you more about in the next slide.
So you do feel, I mean, it's like you, I am very frustrated that the common sense of the story of food, both from a point of view of health, the national health, I mean, whatever way you want to look at it, is not appreciated more, and I don't properly understand it.
Well, I'm now going to, having been sort of waving my arms and getting angry as professors aren't supposed to, I'm now going to reverse it and say, actually, compared to, I was a child in India, and at age nearly 8, returned to Britain. British food was brown. It was brown, I assure you. It was not known for its culinary nicety, you know. British food has actually remarkably improved in that respect. There's more diversity, people, as they've got richer, spending less money on food, travelling more. You know, lots of really interesting things and good things have happened. But it's in pockets. It's not the mainstream British food. It's individual choice time. Here I do have an argument, not an argument, but a very interesting debate with the other Tim. I mean, personalisation is clearly very important, but what I'm talking about is culture. I'm talking about the mass assumptions of what it is. And we think in Britain that food culture is just being able to choose from tens of thousands of items in a supermarket. That's culture. That's not culture. That's a deracinated culture. That's an out-of-control culture. That's a culture where the mindset, your mind, everyone here, children particularly, can be got at by the advertisers. For me, one of the arguments, Tim, and Tim's latest book goes into this very nicely, is one of the things the ultra-processed food companies do, Tim, you and I know this, and Dan knows it, is they advertise. The advertising.
And then they tell you that the advertising doesn't work.
It's the old joke about advertising. They spend a lot of money, they don't know which bit works, but they keep on advertising. They've switched it to social media. It's getting more targeted because the social media enables you to say, what are your interests? This is the real danger of the personalization, is that they've got utterly brilliant metrics on you. Before you even make a choice on the computer or on social media, your profile is, as it were, known. And that is a very advantageous position for a big food company. And if you look at the market, the world market, let alone the British market, let alone the European, there's a massive concentration. I'll give you the European figures. There are 300,000 food manufacturers in Europe. Include Britain in for a moment. 3,000, that's 1%, have 50% of all the foods consumed. So that's 1% of food manufacturers make half the food that Europe eats. Okay.
Doesn't surprise me.
No, well, it wouldn't surprise you because you're literate. But the point is, where's the politics addressing that? Where's the language of choice is a complete joke. It's an unequal choice here. It's a complete distortion of choice.
But the food companies always want it to believe that, you know, they will say, you just need more education, you just need willpower, it's everybody's choice if they end up overweight. And that's the powerful message that they have driven, which is a very populist type of approach.
It's a very powerful, and it has an immense emotional, let alone intellectual attraction.
Because it makes you
but
feel
it just
guilty.
isn't true.
And it isn't true.
It isn't true.
It's such a hard one to fight.
It's very hard, and that means that we all have to accept we think we're in control. You said only one wrong thing about me at the beginning. You said I was the first professor of food policy in the world, Rosie. in the world.
I bow down.
My peer
I bow
group,
down.
my peer group is very small. It's actually grown a lot. There are hundreds now, which is really good. But we have to admit that I think that I control my diet.
Yeah.
The truth is, almost none of us control our diets. It's set by our gender, by where we are, by what we know, by our class, by our income, by, as we always say in public health, rule number one, Tim and I would agree, is choose your parents very wisely.
Okay.
You know,
Well, I think
and that's very hard in terms of diet.
Well, it's jolly hard, yes, because you can't really do anything about it, can you?
Well, she's dropped. She said it's very hard. You were losing. Very hard because you can't do much about it. You can do something about it. You can come to events like this, and you can think, and you can buy boring books. You can buy boring books.
No, you can buy
and educate.
Very interesting.
And you can make sure your kids learn how to
I know,
cook.
and that's what's so great.
And
about
to
school
grow.
Food matters.
But you're booting me off.
I am.